Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today we'll finally look at Resto Druid raid healing guide, and this is going to be looking at multiple different aspects for restoration druids who are looking to raid, and specifically Battle of Dazar'alor and the new raid as well. So we'll be looking at things like talents, we'll be looking at stat priority, we'll be looking at Azerite Gear, and we'll also cover quite in detail the gameplay that's associated with Resto Druids in raiding scenarios. And for the people who played Resto Druids in Legion, they will know that Resto Druids have went through a lot of changes coming into BfA, from being a Tranquility bot, which Tranquility was one of the strongest raid cooldowns, then he got nerfed, and then other spells got buffed, so all of a sudden Resto Druid gameplay is very different in raid situations. And considering there's a lot of Azerite traits that alter your gameplay, we'll talk about them. We'll talk about the chaining of cooldowns. Believe me, there's a lot of cooldowns that you can chain and have little kind of boosts to your HPS based on how you do it on specific situations. But first of all, let's talk about the talent choices. That is probably the most popular choice in raiding scenarios for druids right now, and this is something along the lines of what I have here. And let's talk about tier 15. Tier 15 is actually quite heavily debated. It's between Scenario Ward and Abundance, and both of these talents have a specific reasons to be played in for specific fights. Scenario Ward protects a friendly target for 30 seconds, and any damage that is taken is going to apply a hot on them. So this hot can actually be extended by Flourish as well if you want to really min-max. So Scenario Ward is basically the default choice. If you're not sure what to go with, you just go with Scenario Ward. You place it on your tank on cooldown most of the time, or place it on anyone who needs prolonged healing on them. Let's say someone who has a debuff and things like that. It's a very easy talent to use. Have a weak aura that shows you when it's available, place it on a tank or someone who needs prolonged healing, and you're good. This is going to account for a decent amount of your healing and requires very little effort. Now you have Abundance, which actually changes your gameplay quite a bit, and it's going to be quite hard for the old style Resto Druids coming from Legion into BfA to get used to this. In Abundance, for each rejuvenation you have active, regrowth cost is reduced by 6% and critical chances increased. So all of a sudden, the more rejuves you have, the cheaper and better regrowth becomes. So at the point of 4+ rejuvenations, you'll start thinking, hey, maybe I'm gonna start chaining my regrowths. So having a weak aura tracker, I think I have it right here, tells me how many rejuvenations I have. So at 4+, give or take, you'll start looking at chaining your regrowth. And it's a weird playstyle because for a longest time, Resto Druids were never using regrowth outside of the clear casting proc. So this is it's almost like spot healing build for restoration druids, and it provides you a different play style. All of a sudden you might be looking at, topping up people and things like that, and this is viable on a lot of fights. I want to give a prime example for Blockade, the ship part, where you have you split into 10 groups if you're going mythic. So you split into 10 groups, you're applying rejuvenations on everybody. Everyone is taking an equal amount of damage, everyone's dipping quite low, and you will be thinking in your head that, hey, rejuvenation by itself and all my other heals are not going to be good enough to keep them up, so I better start applying this regrowth. And the best way to do it is with Abundance, because all of a sudden your regrowth is going to cost less, it's going to crit more. So this is a prime example where everyone's taking a lot of damage. You don't really have a priority target, you want to heal everybody, you don't feel rejuvenation is going to be good enough by itself. Abundance is a great choice. For all the other fights, and depending if you're not sure whether to use Abundance or not, you can just go with Scenario Ward and place it on tanks all the time. Very viable based on which fight you do. So let's go to tier 30. Tier 30 is somewhat irrelevant. I mean, it is a movement tier, and you can get away with using Tiger Dash and Wild Charge. These are probably the most popular choices right now. Wild Charge requires a certain macro to really be usable. On fights which are considered to be outdoor fights, you can go into travel form and you have this dash kind of thing, which is really nice with Wild Charge. Or with Tiger Dash, keep in mind, with Tiger Dash, your dash ability is being replaced by this and being made better. So it's not like you're going to have dash and Tiger's Dash. Tiger's Dash is going to replace it. So it doesn't sound as good as it is. Pretty minimal choices, to be honest. You can go with whichever you feel most comfortable with. Tier 45, again, in raid situations, is somewhat up to you to decide. If you want to do kitty DPS, if you're going Mythic Jaina and phase 1, there's nothing to do. There's no healing required if everyone's doing their job. You can go Feral Affinity, provide that DPS, maximum DPS for phase 1. If you feel you're going to be doing progression fights and you feel damage, you're going to be taking a lot of damage, Guardian Affinity can be fine. And a lot of people who, like for fights like Rastakhan, where the tank is staying max distance away from another tank and you kind of staying in between them, Balance Affinity could be a very good choice because it extends or at least increases the range of all your abilities, and you can reach both tanks and both of their raid members and things like that. So based on the situation, you can go with any of these choices. In tier 60, again, utility tiers. Pretty much most of the people, I think, are gonna go with Typhoon because they end up using Typhoon in 5-mans. Mass Entanglement is very, very strong for fights like Megatorque. It's pretty much mandatory for fights like Megatorque, so you will go with that. Mighty Bash, you can use it on certain fights as well. Again, based on the situation, I cannot really give you the right answer. It's all depending on what fight you're doing at the moment. Now, tier 75 and all the other tiers are the healing talents, and this is a big... There's quite a bit of variety or a bit of changes happening. In tier 75, right now, majority of people will go with Tree of Life. And Tree of Life has been a very, very solid choice throughout BfA, but it's been a very solid choice in Battle of Dazar'alor. Some people do tend to go with Cultivation on certain fights that require you to split into, you know, smaller groups, and all of a sudden you might be going more 5-man build-oriented talent choices where Photosynthesis might come into play. But the default choice, I still believe, is Incarnation Tree of Life. With Tree of Life, you will have multiple cooldowns, and with Tree, you have to keep in mind that during this cooldown, your rejuvenation is going to heal more and it's going to cost less mana. So to some extent, this can be regarded as a mana reduction tool. There's multiple ways of optimizing it, and I'll talk about this in gameplay section of it. But casting Rejuvenation and casting Wild Growth is probably your #1 way of optimizing HPS. Don't get bogged down in casting instant regrowths because they're not as good as you might think. So that's the only thing that I'm going to mention right now with Incarnation. But Incarnation, 3-minute cooldown, very good cooldown, and a good choice in 75. In tier 90, and this is where a lot of debate again is happening, between Spring Blossoms and Inner Peace. Inner Peace was regarded as the best choice coming into Battle of Dazar'alor, but right now the #1 or one of the most popular choices is Spring Blossoms. And Spring Blossoms is going to introduce this Mastery build. Not that Mastery is bad. Mastery is actually a very solid secondary stat, but with Spring Blossoms, you will see Mastery jump quite a bit. And all of a sudden, majority of the people will be using Spring Blossoms instead of Inner Peace. Inner Peace reduces the cooldown of Tranquility by 60 seconds, so that means you'll have 2-minute Trank. So if you know the fight, if you know how long the fight is going to last, if your raid leader tells you, hey, you have this talent, Inner Peace selected, you have priority on the first raid cooldown. We're gonna let you use your Tranquility because you're using this talent. Then after that, you'll get to use it 2 minutes afterwards, and you use it on cooldown, and you get an additional Tranquility out of it. Then yeah, Inner Peace is a solid choice if you know how to optimize it. But I've seen so many people, and especially new Resto Druids, who pick Inner Peace because someone told them it's the best choice, and they don't optimize it at all. Their raid leader tells them to use Tranquility 3 minutes into the fight, and I'm just saying, what is the point of you using Inner Peace when you can't really optimize it? Because it requires the knowledge of the fight. It requires an in-depth knowledge of the fight to really pull off Inner Peace, because you are required to get at least additional Tranquility out of it. If you don't know how to really optimize it, when to use it, or your raid leader might not even be saying you have to use it 3 minutes, 4 minutes into the fight, just go with Spring Blossoms. And Spring Blossoms has been a very, very solid choice, and the hotly debated choice, because of how well Battle of Dazar'alor fits it. Everyone's stacked up for majority of the time. You can't really waste your efflorescence too much because a lot of the fights work for it really well. And because of how Mastery is going to interact with Spring Blossoms, because when people stand in your efflorescence, they're going to get this specific hot, and that hot is going to work with your Mastery, and your Mastery is going to become one of the best stats, and we'll talk about that later on. So Spring Blossoms, if you're not sure how to optimize Inner Peace, if you know the fights in well, Inner Peace can be still a solid choice. But right now, a lot of people are going with Spring Blossoms. And in tier 100, right now, the undisputed choice is most likely going to be Flourish. Flourish is very, very strong. Keep in mind that Photosynthesis is close to Flourish in terms of pure healing, depending on the fight that you're doing. But Flourish will provide more life-saving healing, in my opinion. But like I mentioned, Photosynthesis has been picked up for some fights where groups have to be split into 2 groups, like Opulence. You have to think about King Rastakhan, maybe if you're going downstairs or upstairs, depending. Blockade as well. So some people have been using Photosynthesis for those fights, but I still feel Flourish is a very, very solid choice. And if you're not sure about which talent to use, just go with Flourish for the time being. It is very, very good. Now, if we actually look at the stat priority for Resto Druid who's raiding, you'll be surprised to know that it is going to be, of course, heavily dependent on the talent choices. So like I mentioned before, if you do end up going Spring Blossoms, your Effervescence is going to leave a hot on people, and that hot is going to stack with Mastery, meaning that Mastery is going to be arguably your best secondary stat in Battle of Dazar'alor. You have to keep in mind that even if you don't pick Spring Blossoms, Mastery is still gonna be pretty high up there. But the difference between your best secondary stat and your worst secondary stat is not going to be that big if you have a balanced character. But overall, the difference isn't that big. So my advice, highest item level for Resto Druid is going to win out the majority of the cases. Resto Druid is the easiest healer to gear for because every secondary stat is very good for it. Resto Druids enjoy crit, haste, mastery, and versatility. Every time I play my Mistweaver in raiding situations, I try to stay away from haste, and there's so many haste items it makes it difficult for me to gear my Mistweaver. I don't have this problem with Resto Druid. I'm picking up any item that's highest item level. Sometimes I do swap around rings a little bit more because they don't have intellect. Keep in mind, at high item levels, 400, 405 and upwards, intellect is probably going to be your worst stat to have. But because intellect is the worst stat, and because all of your secondaries are quite close to each other, you will be picking highest item level, with the exception of possibly rings, where you might want to try and optimize certain secondaries. If you want to min-max to an extreme, WoW Analyzer, you can use that tool. I think a lot of people know about this. I mention this in my videos all the time, to really try to min-max your stat priority. If you don't want to spend hours and hours and hours and hours into trying to optimize 1% of your character in terms of stat priority, if you don't want to do that, just go highest item level. Try and make sure not to stack a certain secondary too much, because secondaries will devalue the more you have of them. For example, if you have like 30% haste and you only have 5% crit, there's a high chance crit is going to become better than haste because you have so little of crit. So keeping a balance, but if you can keep a balance of stats with highest item level, that is the way to go, and try and achieve that. You will, I promise you will get the best results with that. Now, if you actually look at some of the Azerite traits, and Azerite traits are very funny for Resto Druid because most of the Azerite traits are pretty good. Why do I say funny? Because a lot of the Azerite traits that are great for Resto Druid, they do not stack properly. And what do I mean by that is that you want to get at least one, but that's it. You don't want to get a secondary of the same trait because it's going to be devalued greatly. And we're talking about the best ones. We're talking about Lively Spirit. We're talking about Autumn Leaves. We're talking about Rampart Growth. We're talking about Waking Dream and things like that. All of these Azerite traits do not stack properly. So you just want one of these. For example, so if you look at some of my setup, you can see that I'm using Lively Spirits, and Lively Spirits is a trait that does not stack, so you want only one of these if you can get it. It's one of the top traits you can get. So when Innovate expires, for each spell target cast using Innovate, you gain Intellect for 20 seconds and a certain amount of mana. So this trait by itself actually alters your gameplay quite a bit. So it means that every time you use Innovate, you want to optimize your time. Don't waste any time like not casting. You want to always cast during Innovate, and after Innovate expires, you'll get this Intellect boom that you can, example, chain it with, like, say, Flourish, maybe chain it with Tranquility, maybe chain it with Tree of Life. The possibilities are endless. So this actually alters your gameplay and provides you almost like a small cooldown that you can use after Innovate. Very good to have one trait of this. Treacherous Coven is probably going to be your best Azerite trait in a raiding environment, and this trait stacks properly. So I actually have 3 of these right now, and I'm getting a total of 1,000, a little bit over 1,000 intellect at all times. Now, if you're scared about the secondary part where you take 15% increased damage while below 20%, so you're like, okay, if I'm gonna get 3 of these, I'm gonna take 45% extra damage when I dip below 20%. I'm gonna die at any progression. That's it. It does not work like that. It does not stack. So no matter whether you have 1 or 3 of these, you will only be taking extra 15% increased damage below that 20%. So keep that in mind. So it makes sense. If you have 1 of these, you're taking the highest risk when you have 1. So you might as well try and get 2, 3 and enjoy that intellect gains. This is arguably your best Azerite trait to stack. And if you can't get it, do. If you can't get it, please do get it. So other trait that you want to get as well is also Autumn Leaves. Autumn Leaves by itself is really, really good. You only want 1 of these. Again, doesn't stack properly. Again, Rejuvenation's duration is increased by 1 second. Great. And it heals for an additional amount when it is your only heal overtime effect on a target. And you might be like, okay, this makes no sense, because the secondary effect would say, if I go with Spring Blossoms, I'm gonna have multiple hots on everybody. Autumn Leaves second portion is not gonna do anything. And yeah, it probably won't do anything, but the increase in Rejuvenation's duration is actually worth it, and it still makes it one of your best Azerite traits to have in raid environment. Have at least one of these. You also, and then after that, you have multiple different choices. You have things like Rampart Growths, which again is a very, very solid choice. If I look at other additional traits you can have, and because this video is looking at raiding Resto Druid, I'll be looking at the raiding Azerite traits and what they can offer as well. You also have an option of getting Waking Dream. Again, one of the things, it doesn't really stack properly, so you probably just want one for the time being. Like I mentioned, it's pretty funny considering how many traits don't stack. And also, you can look into getting Bonded Souls. Now, Bonded Souls used to be the #1 best overall Azerite trait for Resto Druids and actually every other healer, but it's been nerfed really heavily, but it still is one of the top traits, and you want to have one if you can get it. It is still a very solid choice. You don't want to get more than one at this point because of the overhealing and things like that. But overall, again, Bonded Souls, still something to pick up. So if I were to summarize this whole Azerite deal, get as many individual Azerite traits as you can. A lot of the Azerite traits for Resto Druid are really, really good. They provide you with nice boost to healing. And if you want to stack something, Treacherous Coven is the one to stack right now. It is a very big increase to your intellect, which is going to increase your damage, healing, whatever you want. It'll increase everything that you do as a druid. So right now, let's look at a healing gameplay for druid in Battle of Dazar'alor and upcoming raids and things like that. So overall, the healing has changed quite a bit. It's no longer just rejuvenation spam. There is a lot of cooldowns that you have at your disposal as a Resto Druid. So if you go with the default build, something like this, it doesn't matter. If you go with the default build, you'll have Tree of Life. You'll have Innervate with Lively Spirits. If you have the Azerite trait, you'll have Tranquility. You'll have Flourish as well. And there's a lot of people who misjudge Flourish for what it does. So Flourish, it extends the duration of all the healing overtime effects on unfriendly players. So basically, it will make your hots longer. But the thing is, you need to make sure before using Flourish all the time, you want to make sure you have as many hots on people as possible. You want to make sure that you have as many rejuvenations. You want to make sure you cast Wild Growth and then Flourish. So what that means is Flourish is going to extend your Wild Growth hot. It's going to extend your rejuvenations, and possibly if you had Scenario Word on the tank or a priority target and it proc that heal over time effect, you might extend that as well. You can keep an eye on that. But a lot of people don't notice that Flourish also increases the rate of your heal over time effects by 100% for 8 seconds. And this affects the heals that happened before Flourish was cast and afterwards. So after you cast Flourish, you want to make sure you're still healing, you're still pressing those rejuvenations, you're still using your Wild Growth, because their healing over time portion is going to be increased for those 8 seconds while Flourish is active. But the hots are only going to be extended, only the hots that were cast before Flourish. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you want to go back to a bread and butter spell priority for Resto Druid, Efflorescence is your #1 spell that you really, really want to care about. Efflorescence has been buffed recently. Its efficiency is incredible, and it's something that you never want to drop off. It is something that you always want to make sure that it's cast on melee or stacked range or stacked raid. Make sure you have a weak aura, make sure you have some kind of a visual audio cue to tell you it's dropped off. It is one of the biggest things that you have to keep up, because Efflorescence has been buffed so much that its priority is insane. Keep that up at all times. Outside of that, you have the Life Bloom, which you can keep on your tank or your priority targets. Again, Life Bloom will proc clear casting. It has a chance of proccing clear casting, which will give you free regrowths to cast. Overall, this is, it's bread and butter. Life Bloom, Efflorescence, and then you can also add to that Scenario Word. Scenario Word should be cast on cooldown as well on tanks and priority targets as well. And you'll notice that Wild Growth has become a lot more efficient over time. At the start of BfA, Wild Growth was quite an inefficient heal to an extent that a lot of Resto Druids will tell you that you should only really cast Wild Growth when there's a lot of people taking damage, that it's not going to overheal and things like that. But over time, the mana cost has been reduced. So at this moment right now, Wild Growth is very efficient, and it's something that you should cast when there is damage happening, it does a lot of healing for the amount of mana it costs, and it is a very, very good spell right now. It is a lot better than it was at the start of BfA. So keep that in mind. Efflorescence, Life Bloom, Scenario Word if you have it as well, Wild Growth when damage is happening. And this is kind of what you do. Swift Mend as well if someone is about to die and things like that. It's your major or your only direct heal outside of Regrowth with Abundance. You should never really cast Regrowth without Abundance outside of clear casting. You should only use it when you get the clear casting proc with Light Bloom. So let's talk about cooldowns. And cooldowns, we can talk about an hour about this because people are still discovering these chaining cooldowns. So for example, if you have Lively Spirits and you have Innervate, how do I use Innervate as a Resto Druid? So first of all, if you cast Innervate, you need to make sure you'll be casting all the time. And majority of the time, people will be using it to cast Rejuvenations, to squeeze in Wild Growth in there, and to also put down Efflorescence or refresh Efflorescence. Like for example, if your Fluorescence is about to expire in 10 seconds or something like that, it might be worth to refresh your Fluorescence during Innervate cast to save some mana. So what you really want to do during Innervate, Rejuvenations, Wild Growth, Efflorescence. These are very good spells to actually squeeze in that Innervate window. And if you get a lot of spells during Innervate, after Innervate ends, with Lively Spirits, Azerite trait, you'll get this intellect bonus. And then you can do whatever with it. If you want, you can try and do an example of this. And before I talk about an example of this, if you're a troll, if you play Horde, you will have Berserking Racial. And Berserking Racial gives you additional haste. And a lot of people actually macro Innervate and Berserker together. So during Innervate, they'll get additional haste from Berserker Racial. They'll be able to cast more spells, which are going to be free because Innervate allows you to cast spells for free. And also, if they have Lively Spirits, it'll give you additional intellect bonus. So keep that in mind if you play a Horde and a Troll. It can be a very good combo. So let's say, for example, you're going to be pre-hotting. And this is a term that you should get familiar as a Resto Druid, and a lot of people will be using it. So pre-hotting, let's say, for example, damage is going to be incoming in about 10 seconds. A lot of people, if their mana allows for, you can do this for as long as your mana allows for this. You'll be putting out Rejuvenations on people that might not be taking any damage, might be at 90% HP, might be at 100% HP, but you're preparing for that damage. Your Rejuvenation is either going to be 15 seconds or 16 seconds, depending on whether you have Autumn Leaves. So there's going to be damage around 10 seconds. You start applying Rejuvenations on the whole party. Damage is about to happen. You're pre-casting Wild Growth. While you're casting Wild Growth, damage happens. It hits everybody's 50% HP. You cast your Wild Growth, and then you follow it with Flourish. So what this is going to do is that it's going to extend your Wild Growth and extend your Rejuvenation, and the damage happened, so everyone's getting healed. Now, if you wanted to play it a bit differently, you could have casted Innervate 10 seconds before the damage happened. You'll be pressing Rejuvenation on everybody, so when the damage happens, you get Lively Spirit bonus. You press Flourish, so all of a sudden, this Flourish, Lively Spirits, Innervate combo is becoming like a real strong raid cooldown. And that is just one of many ways of trying to do it. Like for example, you can also be casting Tranquility. So if you cast Tranquility, you will also notice that Tranquility adds a hot. This hot has been nerfed quite a bit, but it's still a very substantial hot. My grid turns green when there is a Tranquility hot there. You can extend or make it stronger. You can make this hot stronger through Flourish. But it's not always the right way to go, because in a lot of the fights, if you cast Tranquility to deal with a lot of damage, after Tranquility ends, there's no damage happening for another 10 seconds, 20 seconds. So there's no point to change Tranquility into Flourish. But during certain fights, during certain continuous AoE fights, you can absolutely use Tranquility into Flourish. So the way that you would probably go about this is, before you do any big AoE cooldowns or before any big Resto Druid cooldowns, you want to make sure you have as many hots on people as possible, because again, the more hots you have on people, the more mastery stacks you're getting, the more healing you're doing on them. You have to remember, Tranquility hot stacks with mastery as well. So during that period, you will have 20 people, if you're doing Mythic, you will have 20 people, at least one hot on them. So before you want to do anything, you want to make sure you have Rejuvenations on, you want to make sure you cast Wild Growth, and then you can cast Tranquility into it. You cast Tranquility, you wait until Tranquility ends. When Tranquility ends, you can still might put one Rejuvenation or maybe even squeeze in another Wild Growth and then Flourish it. and then you're extending your Tranquility hot, you're extending your Wild Growth hot, and like it's an insane amount of healing for a good amount of time. But the fight has to fit that damage pattern. Like I mentioned, not all fights have continuous damage happening over. Gronk, to some example, Gronk is one of those type of fights where you can definitely change Tranquility into Flourish. You can definitely do it because damage happens usually every 5 to 10 seconds, and if you can definitely get a decent amount of healing out of it. Again, we talked about Innervate, we talked about Flourish, we talked about Tranquility. Let's talk about Tree of Life. So Tree of Life is another big cooldown, and Tree of Life, the way I mentioned before, it should be used mainly on Rejuvenation or Wild Growth. You should not be spending your time on instant regrowths unless someone is about to die completely and you're going to be the only one person to save it. If you're looking at increasing your HPS, Rejuvenation becomes cheaper and becomes more efficient or more powerful during Tree of Life, which means that Tree of Life can almost be considered as a mana saving tool because you will be spamming Rejuvenations for most of it. You will be casting Wild Growth on cooldown during it because it'll affect more people. Don't get bogged down in casting regrowths unless it's absolutely needed. And again, Tree of Life can be combined with Flourish if you want. It can be combined with Innervate. Now this is the part where it's kind of unknown. I can't really tell you exactly the best way to optimize it because there's a lot of different ways to really change these cooldowns. With Lively Spirits Innervate, with Flourish, Trank with Flourish, Tree of Life with Flourish. I could go on and on about all of this, but just keep in mind the default ones. Keep Efflorescence down, make sure it's healing the right people. If you're using Spring Blossoms, it is extremely important to have this, so just get the basics down. Efflorescence, Life Bloom, even though it's not as important, it's still your priority spell. Keep it on the tanks. Scenario Ward, Wild Growth when there's damage happening, and then after that start preparing. Start pre-hotting if your mana allows for it. Make sure that you have as many hots as possible before you use Flourish. Make sure you cast as many spells as you can during Innervate. Make sure during Tree of Life that you're casting as many Rejuvenations, as many Wild Growths. And if you know the fight pretty well, try and get that Trank and Flourish into it if it allows for it as well. So again, name of the game for Resto Druid in BfA is definitely Mastery, is definitely as many hots, and trying to chain your cooldowns to have as many these burst healing potential or burst windows as possible. Thank you for watching this guide. If you enjoy this video, please do subscribe. If you want to check out my Patreon as well, it really helps out the channel. It helps me to keep doing these videos. If I missed out on any of these chain cooldown combos, please let me know, guys. People are still discovering them. People are still using these different mastery stacking techniques and things like that. Let me know, leave a comment. Thank you for watching this guide, and I'll see you in my next video.